everybody. Today you join me for a video with a slightly unusual brief. I am driving this, Harry's 2009 Mk6 Volkswagen Golf GTI. And what makes today's video different is that when people email me and invite me to drive their cars, it's because they want to share just how brilliant they think it is, and essentially get my confirmation of their beliefs. However, Harry is very much not in love with this car. In fact, he is so disheartened with it, it may have put him off German machinery forever. Can it really be that bad? And what exactly did it do wrong anyway? Well, let's find out. Today's video is sponsored by CarVertical. If you find yourself on the hunt for a Golf GTI or just about anything else, don't forget to use their service, which will perform an in-depth check of many different sources from around the globe, giving you all the information you want to know on any potential used car purchase, including accident damage regardless of write-off status, potential mileage discrepancies, outstanding finance, and usage as a taxi. Best of all, CarVertical works on both mobile and desktop, and in just 60 seconds will give you a new, revised, and even easier than ever before to read report. For 10% off the service, don't forget to use my discount code, which is JAYEMM. To date, I have had the pleasure of driving a great number of the many generations of Golf GTI, including the iconic original, the Mark 1, its much-loved successor, the Mark 2, then the Mk5, the car credited with reviving the reputation and the fortunes of the GTI brand after a rather lackluster showing in the Mark 3 and 4 generations, which I haven't yet experienced. And if you do happen to own one of those and think they have been totally misjudged by history and you'd like to see one on the channel, please get in touch. I have then also experienced the Mark 7, 7.5 and the current model, the Mark 8. And along the way I've even sampled a few Golf Rs and even an R32, which is still one of my favourites. The Mk6 Golf landed late in 2008 and was essentially a facelift of the Mk5, which all would agree is an excellent starting point. And I have to say, from the off, this car does an awful lot right. First off, it looks really good. Not try hard, it's just a very handsome piece of machinery. There are a few areas where the car got a nip and tuck over the Mk5, and I think overall it's a better looking thing. It's also perfectly sized, and actually one of the things that I do admire VW for is that even the current Mark 8 isn't actually really any bigger than this or the Mk5. It's got enough room for 4 adults without it being too much of a squeeze, and the boot's a decent size too. And of course the car came with an incredible variety of engines, although as we're discussing the GTI today, I'm going to ignore nearly all of them bar the spiciest. Perhaps the biggest disappointment for many though was the discontinuation of the R32 and its rather sonorous 3.2 litre VR6. It was replaced instead by a new model dubbed simply the Golf R, which has gone on to become something of an icon in its own right, and that made 270 horsepower courtesy of an uprated version of the old EA113 engine that had also powered the Mk5 GTI. Curiously though, the cooking GTI actually got an all-new engine, dubbed the EA888, which is still in service today and has powered many a great Golf variant, including the later R. In standard guise, it made 210 horsepower versus the 200 of the Mk5 and 207 pound-foot of torque. That's 280 newton meters. Even in period, the car did receive criticism for its power figure. You see, these were not particularly cheap cars, and 200 odd horsepower even then wasn't particularly impressive. Though the Mk5 was certainly quicker than its Mark 4 predecessor, by the time this car had rolled around, the competition was beginning to catch up. And although turbocharging wasn't the default option then, as it is now, and so many argued that the car's increased torque provided the performance gain over its rivals, the simple fact is there were many who felt that the extra 10 horsepower over the Mk5 just wasn't enough. You could of course have argued that for those customers the Golf R was the car they wanted to buy, but back then the R was nowhere near as popular as it was to later become in the 7th generation. As a sort of halfway house, VW did then do an Edition 35, following on from the Edition 30 and its predecessors. This curiously also had the same older engine as the Golf R and made about 230 odd horsepower, so more or less exactly halfway between this and the R. being essentially an update of the Mark V, the 6 really was a case of evolution rather than revolution. And it should really tell you everything you need to know about the model that when I did my research, the big headline thing that VW were keen to push with the announcement of this was the fact that they had made their factory and production process 20% more efficient, which is incredibly Germanic and very depressing. In other words, it's their way of saying we can build them cheaper now, but we're not going to sell them cheaper. The engine, I suppose, was a bit of a big deal, though as we'll discuss in a little bit, it didn't turn out quite so well as many had hoped. Still, the car offered plenty of options and features which you'd have struggled to find in its competition of the day. That included an updated version of the DSG dual-clutch gearbox, which had been introduced a few years earlier. Remember, this car was built at a time when much of the competition would have been exclusively manual, so the idea of offering an automatic box in a hot hatch at all was already a fairly novel thing, and to have a decent dual clutch that did a good job of both being an automatic and a manual was sensational. Even now, it's still pretty decent. You also got adaptive dampers, branded DCC, and new for the Mark 6, you also got something called XDS, an electronic limited slip differential. But I have to say, when I read into it, I was a little bit disappointed, because what it really is not a true limited slip differential at all. Instead, it's brake steer. You get into a bend and the car can brake one or the other wheel, depending on what is required, to get you round, which is nice, but a proper differential, it is not. However, thus far, it all sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Because the Mark 6 is simply following the template laid down by the Mark 5. In other words, it's not trying to be the most raw, hardcore, focused hot hatch out there. It's not trying to be a track day escapee. It's just trying to be a good, sensible car you can drive day in, day out, and then, as and when required, have a little bit of fun with. And as for that, I have to say, I think this car's doing a pretty good job. The steering is even decent, and let's be honest here, that is a weakness in many a modern hot hatch, particularly VWs. The engine is nice and responsive, the turbo lag never really gets in the way, but it's got good punch all the way from a couple of thousand RPM to its just over 6 grand red line. Silly sounding though it may be, and slightly irksome to me, that XDS differential also does the job. You can feel it tightening the line in the bends, and this is a great car to hustle. You can really lean on it in a corner, the brakes are strong, dependable, easy to modulate. As a back road blaster, this car does the job. Out comes the JAYEMM rubber stamp. As a fun thing, this car gets a big pass. But there's a problem, isn't there? This car has got to have done something wrong to have upset its owner quite so much. What's that? Well, I'll happily tell you. Right after this, my patent-pending hill start 3-point turn torture test, where the Golf does an okay job. Gearbox is easy to modulate. This car has an aftermarket reversing camera, which actually operates much like the official one, so it's hidden in the badge. 400 odd quid that, but here's the problem. Like I said, you buy a Golf GTI specifically because you want the fun bit of the GTI and the nice, sensible, boring bit of the Golf. Previous to this, Harry had his first car, a Mitsubishi Colt. What an epic car to have as your first, and then later a Suzuki Swift Sport, which he thoroughly enjoyed, but wanting something a little more grown up, he felt like this was the obvious choice. And he's regretted that massively, because from the off, this car has been almost nothing but problematic. That nice new engine that I mentioned, well, they're famous for timing chain issues, more specifically, timing chain tensioner issues. So, as soon as he got it, he thought the sensible thing to do would be get the preventative maintenance done. In 2013, VW finally admitted there had been a bit of an issue, so released an updated part. These days, most cars have had that fitted, but as this one had sat around for a while and was on relatively low mileage, he figured better safe than sorry. However, when he went to do that, he then found out there was a leaking radiator, so by the time all was said and done, the car had just cost 1,200 quid. And then he found out that the water pump needed doing, and then he found out that the front calipers had seized, so they needed replacing, and VW wanted £300 each for the correct red ones. That's why they're currently silver. And then he found out that 2 of the springs had cracked, which is why he replaced all of them with some slightly lower and progressive items. I think this may have been a mistake because the car does ride for me just way too harshly. He says he doesn't feel like it's much firmer than standard, but I don't think many regular Golf GTIs drive like this. It's borderline Honda Civic FN2 bad, this thing. And then he found out that the clutch was making a noise, though he has been told it's probably okay. It does just make some rather disconcerting sounds every now and again. And then the turbo developed an issue, which luckily turned out just to be a broken clamp, but was worrying nonetheless. And then the air intake started spraying oil everywhere, so he had to try and replace that. Half of it has been done properly, and the other half has been done with eBay parts because he's saving up to get the good ones. He isn't on an unlimited budget, and therefore doesn't appreciate the fact that despite spending good money on getting what should have been a decent example, this car has cost him over £2,000 in maintenance since he bought it about a year and a bit ago. In fact, by my maths, he's actually closer to £3,000, though I would completely understand if he just doesn't want to admit that. And while I'd love to be able to tell you that he is unlucky, actually, when I did my research, I found out that there are plenty of other problems you can get with these too, including carbon buildup on the engines, on account of the fact it's direct injection, failing coil packs, and a whole host of leaks from just about anywhere and everywhere you might imagine. The DSG also has a rather infamous mechatronic failure, which, while not as expensive to replace as it used to be, is still not a cheap or small job. And then when you're reminded that they were proud to tell you of the fact this was the car they managed to build more efficiently than the last one, you can't help but wonder if they were just starting to cut a few corners. Everything I've read about this car and the experience that Harry has had really does go against the idea of German cars as reasonably built and dependable. Okay, I know for a long time that's been something of a myth. They haven't overbuilt a car for about 20 years, but still, they should be durable, they should be reliable. And this one certainly hasn't been. And that is a shame, because fundamentally, I actually really like this car. It looks beautiful in this tornado red paintwork. I love the fact he's gone for the classic 3-door layout. It's a decent looking thing, this. He was also set on getting the cloth interior with the tartan seats, and though disappointingly the Mk6 doesn't have the classic golf ball gear lever, you know what? This is growing on me. Slowly, but it is. And I'm sure there are plenty of good Mk6 GTIs out there with prices starting from as little as £5,000. Someone is, I'm sure, going to get a bargain. But given the nature of it, and knowing the fact that both the Mk5 and Mk7 exist, with the 5 being better value and the 7 a little bit quicker, possibly better built, and certainly a little bit more technology laden, I am struggling to find a particular reason why I can actually recommend the Mk6 Golf GTI. And for a car that in principle does nearly everything right, and I've really enjoyed driving. I mean, to hustle, this thing is one of the best regular Golf GTIs I've ever experienced. That's a shame, isn't it? That's a real shame. So then, there we have it. That is the Mk6 Golf GTI. Have you owned one? Do you currently own one? What's your experience been like? Has Harry just been unlucky, or is this par for the course? Please let me know. Hit the comment section, make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.